Hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with Chief Political Correspondent for The Sun, Jack Elsom, and The Guardian's Deputy Political Editor, Jessica Elgot. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. Well, on the front of the Mirror, hope for the health service as the Chancellor unveils a new NHS package to tackle waiting lists. And that's the same on the front of The Guardian as the government's new budget vows to rebuild a broken, not beaten NHS. But The Telegraph warns that all these commitments to the NHS will need more tax rises. And in the front of the Mail, the Health Secretary warns that even with additional funding, Labour's first budget tomorrow is unlikely to cure the NHS. And that's the same story on the front of The Times. The Express reports that Rachel Reeves has been told that it's not too late for a U-turn on her controversial decision to means test the winter fuel payment. Charities have told the Eye that they may need to make cutbacks if the Chancellor goes ahead with raising national insurance on employers this week. The Sun leads with Manchester United sacking manager Erik ten Hag after a difficult start to the season. The Star's front page shows an image of him getting on a private jet back to Amsterdam just after he received the news. And the Metro reports on a new sex crime of turning photos of children into AI pornographic images. And the Financial Times says thousands of jobs are at risk as Volkswagen plans to shut down at least 3 German factories. And the reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Jack Elsom and Jessica Elgot. Thank you both so much for being with us. I mean, unsurprisingly, the budget on most of the front pages in one way or another. Let's start with The Guardian, page 1. And here, linking it to the NHS, one of the priorities for the Chancellor, the budget will revive a broken but not beaten NHS. That's according to Rachel Reeves. Jack.
Yeah, it's interesting. Since Labour got into power, they've really sort of laid bare the state of the NHS. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, commissioned that Lord Darcy report to really sort of lift up the stone and see what was beneath it. And it revealed an NHS in absolute crisis. And now, after having laid the blame pretty squarely at the Tories, I think a lot of voters are going to be asking, so what is your plan to fix it? We're going to get a lot of that in the budget on Wednesday. It looks like we're going to get another £1.5 billion to sort of go towards things like new scanners, new radiography equipment, the sort of modernisation of the NHS that Wes Streeting's talking about. It's interesting, though, because all throughout his period in opposition, and then since he became Health Secretary, he's constantly said we can't just chuck money at this. It's about reform. It's going to require some money in the budget, and they're talking about that today. But fundamental reform, I think, is what's needed here, and that is what Wes Streeting is sort of setting out today and in future.
Jessica, before I come to you, let's just pull another front page as well, a different angle to the same story. The Daily Telegraph, NHS will need more tax rises, signals Reeves, so not just this budget, but potentially, future years as well.
It's an interesting contrast to some of the language that Keir Starmer was using in his speech, where he was asked quite directly about this. Essentially, is this going to be the hardest budget? And the Prime Minister said he thought it would be the hardest budget, that this was the time to get the most difficult decisions out early, and that although he couldn't promise there'd be no future tweaks to the tax system, that he hoped that this would be the one which would sort of lay the foundations for then having improvements through the rest of the Parliament. But I mean, I think it's clear that both Wes Streeting and Rachel Reeves were saying in their visit that they did today that they thought that what they were doing in this budget for the NHS was only kind of stabilising it. It wasn't really going to necessarily be enough to make the kind of huge improvements that a lot of people are looking to see. When people voted in Labour, a lot of the time people mentioned public services, and the NHS is the sort of core part of that.
Yeah, and let's just look again, front page of The Times. from West Streeting, extra billions for health service will only arrest the decline. So, Jessica, obviously echoing what you were just saying, that, you know, this is trying to sort of balance it in a way, but can't prevent winter crisis, for example, is what West Streeting is saying here. Do you think there are slightly different messages from the Health Secretary, Rachel Reeves, and the Prime Minister, or that ultimately they're all just trying to tackle the issue?
Well, it looks like it, because you have two different front pages and you have two different sort of messages coming through. But this is the bind that Labour have always been in. They've been accused, since when they were in government the last time, of just pumping money into the NHS, and it just gets swallowed up and spat out, and there's not any sort of real reform in it. I think the point that West Streeting and Rachel Reeves are trying to say is that, yes, money might be part of the solution here, and we are going to invest in the NHS. Obviously, they're a Labour government. They're sort of almost expected to pump money into the NHS, and that will be and that will definitely be the case in the budget. But also, rather than just chucking funds at it, you have to have some sort of reform. And to be fair, West Streeting's been pretty hot on this, because what you don't want is a situation where in 5 years' time, and Keir Starmer said today that there's going to be a new tracker in government, so you can actually hold them to account and see for yourselves, you know, how they're getting on with these priorities. You don't want a situation where you've spent billions more pounds, and you can sort of say that, but actually voters and patients turn around and go, where are the results? And so that's going to be the reforms that they're going to be trying to push through.
And waiting lists is the absolute sort of key thing to this. There's already more than 7 million people on waiting lists. That's an extraordinary number of people. There's 280,000 people, I think, still who've been waiting for more than a year for their treatment on the NHS. And a lot of that was kind of predicated on of strikes, the reason behind why these waiting lists are going up so much. And since the strikes have been ended by the government, then those waiting lists have actually stayed stubbornly high since then. And so that shows you that it's not just about sort of ending strike days, but there are significant sort of core problems in the way the health service is operating that are not getting those waiting lists down.
Which is exactly the headline front page of the Mirror, Labour's war on waiting lists. Because I guess, Jack, you know, not everyone will follow the details of the budget, but everyone knows how long they have to wait for an appointment.
Yeah, and it's one of these things where, you know, a lot of times in politics and, you know, budget and economics, we talk about pretty abstract terms which don't really, you know, weave into people's, you know, their interface in their daily lives, whereas the NHS is something which most of us, you know, interact with at some point. And people can see it for themselves. They try and book a GP appointment, they go into A&E, they know how long it takes. Labour have banged on about this for 5 years. It's now up to them to try and prove it, because, you know, they were very sort of vocal, criticising the Conservatives about, you know, long waiting lists. And so it is now up to them to really sort of, you know, put their monies where their mouth is, and maybe put the reform where their mouth is, you know, to pardon the phrase, and try and get these waiting lists down.
Jack and I would be going up and down the country, you know, through the election campaign, and, you know, I cannot count the number of times that the people who said that their priority was they knew someone or they were on an NHS waiting list. It was an extraordinary number of people.
And interestingly, it became part of Keir Starmer's definition of a working person as well, being on a waiting list as well. So let's take a look at the front page of The Eye. So still the budget, of course, slightly different angle here. National insurance hike will damage core services. That's a warning from charities. Jessica.
Well, we're expecting the Chancellor to raise the level of national insurance that's paid by employers, not by employees. So you won't see that on your payslip if you're an employee, but you would. It would affect you if you employ anyone, if you run a small business or indeed a large business. And one of the areas that this is being highlighted by The Eye is that charities say they might be forced to make cutback. Of course, charities still are the ones who they employ people, they pay national insurance, and that will come out of their own pockets of the income that they raise. So, of course, all of these, it's another example of how there are no good tax rises, there are no easy ones, and there's always going to be adverse effects of the ones that the Chancellor chooses to do.
Yeah, you know, it's one of the unintended consequences, really, of Rachel Reeves scrambling around trying to find any sort of lever she can pull to raise the money she says she needs. You know, in the election, they obviously said they weren't going to do VAT, income tax, corporation tax and national insurance. We now know that to be just on employees. Obviously, employers seem to be in the crosshairs. Basically wipe out then about 70 to 80% of all revenue raises. And so what you're left with is, you know, capital gains, inheritance tax, employer national insurance. The problem is that obviously that's going to affect, you know, as the Eye points out today, a lot of sectors which Rachel Reeves wouldn't want to hit, the charity sector. But she's basically put herself into a bind by making all these promises during the election. She's now having to look for ways to raise a lot of cash. And, you know, if the charity sector gets hit, then, you know, so be it in a sense. But she's in a really difficult position here because she's not going to be able to please everyone.
Just a quick question to both of you as, you know, obviously keen political observers. Is it normal that you would get quite so many leaks weeks in advance warnings before a budget, or do you get the sense that Rachel Reeves is trying to, lay the ground for, a painful budget?
I think you can never really please everyone, because on the one hand, if you sort of drip things out there ahead of time, you're going to get people like the Speaker and the opposition. And Lindsay Hoyle was furious today about all these pre-budget leaks. But on the other hand, if you don't sort of roll the pitch and give an indication of where you're going, you almost get a sort of Liz Truss-style meltdown effect, where it's such a shock and no one's been prepared for it, that then the markets go into free fall and spook and buck. And so it's a really fine balance, isn't it?
Do you agree with that?
I mean, I'm not against journalists finding out things in terms of what they find in the budget. I'm fully in favour of it.
Me too.
OK, Jessica, stay with us now. A woeful start to the season and a sacked manager. What is next for Manchester United?
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's futures.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Do you fear a fourth indictment? Does your government owe an apology to the British home children?
Great to see you.
Does your government owe them an apology? The fact that they were intercepted, does that indicate a military weakness on the part of Iran?
No.
Free, wherever you get your news. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. You can feel a devastating power. It had been a difficult night in a deadly storm.
Bang, bang. You can hear it hitting the windows.
Our houses are okay.
It's depressing.
As bad as all of this is, it could have been much worse. Today, this land they call sacred is at the heart of America's electric car revolution.
To me, it's a sacred ground.
The white gold rush is a race that Biden doesn't want to lose. I've covered some of the biggest stories in the world. Donald Trump, 45th President of the United States, it would appear is about to learn his fate.
Escort coming out!
San Quentin houses America's largest death row. They rarely allow cameras onto the condemned block.
James Matthews, Sky News. I want to be treated equally like everyone else.
It's one step closer to getting out, to getting off death row.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Mr. Trump, James Matthews from Sky News.
Hey, James.
You're diminished by claims that you're a racist.
The question?
Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Vladimir Putin calls you outstanding. What do you call him, sir?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me now, Chief Political Correspondent for The Sun, Jack Elsom, and The Guardian's Deputy Political Editor, Jessica Elgot. OK, let's go now to another story that's been making the front page. It's not the budget this time. Man United. Let's start with The Sun. Jack, your paper, so Erik Ten Hag, Man United manager, sacked this morning. Apparently was already on a flight back to the Netherlands about 2 hours afterwards.
Yeah, no, he's already left the country. I mean, this news wasn't exactly shocking to people that have been following this saga. He seemed to be a dead man walking for a long time now. In fact, it even seemed that Man United tried to replace him over the summer. He seemed to get one last reprieve after winning the FA Cup. But then, obviously, they were sort of still scouting around, trying to find someone else, potentially Thomas Tuchel. He's now taking the England job. Man United now 14th in the Premier League. They've so fallen from grace since the days under Alex Ferguson, where they were winning title after title. They've had 6 managers since then. None of them have lasted really past 3 years. And so they're still in that period now where they're in the doldrums and they're going to have to try and find another manager to try and bring them back to the glory days.
And there's an interesting quote in The Sun. It says, a United insider said the dressing room has been like a morgue recently. It's no wonder that he's gone, and gone he is. Jessica, even people who didn't know about football would know about Man United, and not just in this country or Europe, but literally worldwide.
Yeah, of course. I remember once going on holiday and seeing that it was in a Buddhist temple and there was a little shrine and there was some like Man United shirts. So, yeah, to say that Manchester United have got this, like, incredible reputation around the world, and, the 14th, it must be the lowest that they've ever been in the Premiership, and certainly it is since Fergie. And to their most recent result was, I think, particularly galling, and so that this is, it's not in many ways surprising that he's gone. But, still, the Sun says he's getting a £50 million payoff, so that must soften the blow a little bit.
I guess so. Let's go to the Daily Telegraph now. And on the front page, slightly awkward kiss there between Donald Trump and his wife, Melania. And this was at the rally, the last one, really, of the election campaign at Madison Square Garden. Obviously, New York, not in a swing state, but Donald Trump very much, wanted to be in his New York. But he got in trouble, didn't? Well, not him necessarily, but one of the opening acts. Jessica.
Yeah, so there was this joke made by, it wasn't a particularly funny joke, and in fact no one even in the hall
in fairness,
he
was booed in the room.
Yeah, in fact no one in the hall, when I think he referred to Puerto Rico as a floating island of garbage. Yeah, and even in a Trump rally, people didn't laugh at that joke, which is quite an extraordinary thing. And so he's now, it's the first time I think I can even really recall this happening, that the Trump campaign has had to distance themselves from something one of their own supporters has said.
Especially because Trump has been doing very well with the Latino community in the States.
I was going to say, it seemed completely like an own goal. And, whether they knew this joke was going to come, it probably seemed they didn't actually, and this comedian was just freewheeling. But it really sort of dents their standing amongst the community because, there are lots of sort of Latinos, especially in the swing states, especially Pennsylvania. They've been trying really hard to court these people. And now to sort of put something on stage and share a platform with them who's, openly mocking them and, insulting them seems like it's spectacularly backfired here.
Yeah, I think there's more. There's double the number of Puerto Ricans, I think, in the United States as there are in Puerto Rico. So it's a huge diaspora, a huge community, and especially, as Jack was saying, in Pennsylvania. And so that's such an important stake, the crucial one for him.
And they do tend to be socially conservative and quite religious, so, not unnatural Republican voters, but, we'll see whether it's had an impact. Jack, Jessica, thank you so much for having gone through the papers with us.